Good morning, YouTube. I thought I'd write a quick introduction to Keith Fenner's What's in Your Box competition. So, I'm located in Perth, Western Australia, the most isolated capital city in the world. And from a very young age, I've learned how to fix things that were broken and make things happen when you didn't have the right tool. When I was a kid, I went into the parents' garage and found a really old car. Spoke to my folks. It was Dad's wedding present to my mother. It's an Healey Bug-Eye Sprite. I spent the next 2.5 years doing a bare metal rebuild on this car and ended up putting it together and driving it across 3,500 miles across Australia to Melbourne for the National Healey Rally, where Jeffrey Healey, the guy who originally designed the car, was going to be. Fun started on day one. We got rain the entire way, and this is a convertible, so of course water comes in through every single crack, crevice and opening. We got about 700 miles on the trip, and we started to lose power. The power supply for this little beast, generator being one of those olden days type inventions that nobody uses anymore because they are shit. Local auto electrician, and asked him to check it for me, and he plugged a battery in it, and he said, "Oh, yeah, it spins. If it motors, it charges, it's fine." 700 kilometres away from base, we found out that wasn't quite the case. The armature or commutator had worn out of round sometime in its history, which resulted in the destruction of the brushes, little carbon brushes that transfer the little pixies from the spinning rotor into your battery. No pixies, no charge going to the battery, sun going down, and of course, no battery, no go. We managed to find a battery that was fully charged at the Norseman garage, plugged that in and got it going. That allowed us probably another 5 hours driving before that also went flat. 5 hours driving got us to Mundrabilla Homestead, or at least to the Mundrabilla petrol station. Pleading our case to the guys there, they said, "Oh, the guy up at the station might have something." We were looking for brushes because, of course, without brushes, we couldn't do anything. We were stopping at all the car yards along the way, trying to find these wrecks of old cars left along the side of the road that might possibly allow us to, make something. The guy at Mundrabilla Homestead had little brushes from his welder. I think that's what he said they were from. I don't know quite what brushes are doing in a welder. Anyway, with these brushes on the side of the road, I pulled the generator apart and hand filed some new brushes, put them back in, and hey presto, we had pixies again. Battery started charging, all was good, we were on our way. Trip was going well, still very wet. We hit 2 kilometre long section of unsealed road, and that turned our car to a light shade of brown, totally covered in mud, and mud coming through all the entries and exits of the vehicle as well, being this is a convertible 1956, and they don't hold water out. Me being young and 17 at the time, if it'll do 60 miles an hour, I'm sure it'll do 70 miles an hour. So the speed increased and the pixies got angry, and this set of brushes eventually blew up as well. That got us through to Adelaide, which is a fair way along the track. We found a auto electrician there. He was like, "Oh yeah, I can rebuild your generator, I know how to do this." He gave me a lesson on how to lubricate the rear bush on these things, because they have a bush, not a bearing. Proceeded to tell me all the magical stories about, when he was a lad and how he did these things. Managed to get my generator remachined and it looked lovely, all that sort of stuff. And of course he fitted the Jenny because, I'm the young apprentice and I didn't really know these things. And off we went. We got as far as Ballarat, which is pretty close to where we were trying to get to, before the generator again cacked itself. The reason this time, believe it or not, young viewers, is that a bush in the rear of a generator is not able to take the side load of a bearing. After this guy had spent lengths of time telling us how well he'd lubricated this bush and everything, he then got his 200-pound gorilla arms on it and whacked the tension on the belt from the water pump and the crank up to about 11.5. Side load in the bush is what caused it to burn out. When it burnt out, it then collided the rear of the commutator into the side of the brush housing, and the little angry pixies got even angrier. No more power. We eventually limped into base, and a very sorry state we are, covered with oil, mud, dirt, and the entire vehicle a light shade of brown. Not a pixie in sight. My father and myself, sort of emerging from this shit brown coloured 4 wheels of death, drove up to the welcome day, only half a day late. Tired and overwrought, but eventually we managed to get the stuff out of the car and go to sleep. I was pretty disappointed at this stage, but my father decided no, he was going to get up nice and early. He cleaned the car top to bottom, got us back to our bright shiny paintwork and looking brand new again, and we went to the display day. I was at the front row of this thing in the specials. Along comes Jeff Healey, the guy who designed this particular car with his father in the 1950s. He saw my Sprite and he was absolutely rapt by it. He's like, wow, this is awesome. I said to Jeff, would you like to take it for a drive? And he's like, hell yeah, jumped in. As Jeffrey Healey, the designer of this car, drove my little bugger around the field and showed them his favourite little beastie. A guy there had attended the day at the display, so said, oh, I got a little car like that. It's a Morris Minor, and it's got a generator and stuff you're welcome to. I'm like, holy hand grenades, Batman, another generator. We very quickly agreed a price, and I went back with him and picked up his generator and put it into my little bug eye, and again I had pixies, and they weren't angry at all. And I'd learnt my lesson, do not over-tighten belts on generator pulleys. The Austin Healey Club was a great place for me to start meeting people who would later become some of my most valued friends. A guy called Dave Cooper was a member of the Healey Club at that time, and he and his wife and his young son recently come out from Zimbabwe and were a member of that club. And I got to know Dave a little bit as one of the guys who was always pretty friendly. He had a sort of swings and roundabouts kind of motto, you know. He was working away on the mines for a lot of that time, and so I didn't see him very much. Fast forward about 10 years, and I'm driving my little car because this is my pride and joy. It's also the only car I have. No money type situation going on. This little bugger Sprite had developed a bit of an interesting habit. You'd be driving along, and then suddenly there'd be this clack-a-dack-a-dack-a-dack-a-dack-a-dack sort of noise, and then you drive a bit further, and then the noise would sort of clack-a-dack-a-dack-a-ding, and it would stop. And the car would keep going, and nothing was wrong, and it was just fine and dandy. So, after a couple of months of this sort of thing going on, eventually one day it sort of didn't just keep going on, and it sort of started to slow down a little bit. Not really sound so happy. This is many years later, and I realised that something wasn't quite right. I was driving along and eventually dropped down, I think, 2 cylinders of this sort of 4-cylinder car, and it was still clack-a-dackering a bit, and it was still sort of going and stopping a bit. I managed to sort of limp it around to Dave's now workshop, where he was just around the corner from where I was working. And Dave doing engine rebuilds, cylinder head repairs, all that sort of stuff. And I just essentially dropped on his door one day and said, hey, haven't seen you for a while. I'm in a bit of a spot. I don't have any tools. What can I do? He says, oh, easy. Just pull that around the back. Here's my tools. Pull the motor out and we'll have a look at it. That was pretty shocking for me. Yeah, jumped in, pulled the motor out and stripped it down and pulled the head off. And, oh, that was interesting. There's no oil in the head. That's not normal. Cam was all sort of chowdered up. The rockers were all chowdered up. Everything was pretty dry there. Anyway, pulled the head off. Ooh, that's a bit interesting. Those pistons are meant to be round, not round with little chew-up siding marks all through them. Looking at the top of the pistons, there's lots of little chowder marks in there, little angry Androlfi people jumping up and down with a hammer, making marks in the top of the pistons. Pulled the pistons out, looked at the side of the pistons. I found out finally what that little clack-a-dack-a-dack noise was. It was little parts of piston ring jumping up the side of the piston. And I say jumping up because, you know, these guys were pretty adept at gymnastics. They managed to break apart, then chew away out of the top ringland of the piston, and then jump up and down a little bit, and eventually just spit their way down the exhaust, and off we went a bit more. So the pistons were stuffed. In pulling the head off, I managed to find out why the top end of the head was dry as shit. And it was that the guy who built the motor for me originally had been dealing with an issue I was complaining with, which was that the car was smoking. Brand new motor, under warranty. I probably took it back 5 or 6 times. Each time he'd pull the motor out, he'd do a bit of work, he'd put it back in again, and we'd drive off, and it was smoking again. Eventually it stopped smoking, so I was like, oh cool, he sorted it out. And how he stopped smoking was to plug the oil feed to the head. Now, dear listeners, if you know, oil is one of those things that lubricates, and also when it burns, it tends to smoke. So we've managed to stop the smoking. We also stopped the lubrication. This is not what's meant to happen in an engine. So in any case, we ended up with this little engine with a brass plug stopping all the oil flow to the head, resulting in my total chowdering up of my valve train. The pistons have clacked it, not necessarily for the same reason, but this motor had only done a few thousand miles. It really wasn't very far, so perhaps one of the many rebuilds, the pistons had been smashed or broken or something when the pistons went back in the block Who the hell knows what went on? Oil pressure was also dropping off, which meant that my mains on my crank was also stuffed, my camshaft was stuffed. Pretty much everything we looked at in this motor, Dave and myself, was absolutely junk. Oh shit. I've got a car parked on the side of the road without a motor. I don't have any tools, don't have any money, I don't have any motor. And Dave's like, that looks a bit fucked. Go over the corner over there, pull that other motor out. And he's this motor just in the side of the shed. We strip it down, I've cleaned it all up, I've got it all out, and everything's looking really nice, brand new almost. He's like, oh yeah, that was a motor that was in a Sprite I had. Guy just restored it, pulled the motor out and stuff and stripped it down. I was going to do a rebuild on the vehicle, but never really happened. Alright, well, let's you get some bearings and some rings for that. Put it all together. There's this motor. He's like, oh, we'll put it in your car. I was like, okay, put it in the car and yeah, off you go. What the hell? So here's this guy who doesn't really know me. He knows I'm an Austin Healey Club member. He knows I've been around for 10 plus years or whatever. And he's just basically let me use his workshop, handed me a motor, told me to rebuild it, helped me rebuild it, shown me something, and then let me go away without bloody anything. I'm like, I can't do that. I can't afford it. He says, we'll figure it out. And that was my first really major journeyman experience or experience of community. So the thing about the classic car crowd is you get a feeling of history. You get a feeling of your place in the life of something old. You get an awareness that you're a custodian, you're a caretaker, not an owner. It's quite different from a modern car where you're the owner for the 5 years that it lasts and then you throw it away and it's gone and then crushed and turned into something else. This is a car from the 1950s, well before I was born, and it's likely to be around well after I'm gone. And the same, I think, can be said for a lot of the older machines that we have in our lives, the lathes, the mills, the shapers, the grinders. So I've developed a bit of a fascination for my place in the caretaking of these machines. We're dealing with really lovingly made old iron that's going to be around well and truly after we're gone. I managed to more recently kit my workshop out with some of these old girls. I've got an Elliott 820 surface grinder, hydraulically driven. The old man has managed to pick up a Douglas 10.5-inch shaper. He's got a 1956 CVA toolroom lathe and a Hercus mill, a Bridgeport copy. And these pieces of gear, the way they're looked after, they're going to be around for a very long time. It's not just the machines that take time, effort and money, it's the tooling to do the work. And as far as tooling, I've managed to pull myself together some really awesome measuring equipment. Here's this Chinese metal caliper. This is my go-to machine. Also recently picked up at a flea market these 3 C-clamps. There's a 0, 1, 2 and 2 to 3 inch C-clamp. Also, this one here looks like it's a Moore & Wright, and these 2 look like some sort of Chinese copy, but, they'll get me closer. Dave told me a story where he was working on a project. I'm not exactly sure what the project was, but his mate Lou was there giving him all sorts of encouragement. David finally finished it, and Lou was like, yeah, that's awesome, mate, that's really awesome. It just needs one more thing. And so he went over to the scraps pile and he picked up a piece of metal and took out the arc welder and welded this piece of metal onto the side of this project. And Dave's like, what the hell's that? And Lou said to him, that's the handle, so you can pick it up, throw it in the bin and start again. And it was the kind of relationship where the 2 of them could rag each other on and actually make something better out of that conversation, that involvement in that community, that teacher-student kind of relationship. Fast forward another 10 years and Dave unfortunately developed Alzheimer's and isn't really a part of my daily life. Alzheimer's is pretty cruel in the way that it leaves the people behind dealing with the issue. Dave is still alive. He's in a good place. He's well taken care of. He's just not able to contribute in a way that most people would be able to. One of the things that this sparked was a conversation with my wife, and she's been telling me as you get older, the teaching and the learning that you do kind of flips. You go from a period in your life where you don't know very much and you think you know everything to the point where you know quite a bit and you realise you know very little. She suggested to me that maybe it was a time in my life, I no longer had a teacher, but perhaps I could share some of what I had gained from Dave and really celebrate his achievements, his life, his love of just good fun, and turn it into something reasonable. And I've been struggling over the last number of years, probably 5-10 years, as to how to actually achieve that and where to achieve that. I'm pretty connected to the internet and have been for probably 25 years now. There's a number of different communities there, but they're all different. There's not really that face-to-face camaraderie, at least there wasn't back then. I got involved in 3D printing about 4 years ago and building my own 3D printers and getting involved with the RepRap community chat, and you've got wikis and you've got links, and there's a place called Thingiverse, and Thingiverse is a repository for designs. I've found a way there to kind of give back to community in essentially open sourcing the designs I've made, sharing ideas I've had, giving people an idea to reuse, repair old shit just by printing out something plastic. An example of this is a black and white laser that we had at work, and it was off being repaired, and the repair guy said, nah, it's junk, throw away, we can't buy parts for it. So I asked the guy what part it was that he wasn't able to buy, and he said, the gearbox is chowdered, it's not going to work. And I said, can you bring the gearbox in? I'd like to have a look at it. So he brought in this gearbox, and lo and behold, it was just a couple of plastic or nylon gears in a frame, and I thought, So I pulled out my trusty C-clamp and measured it up and went to my piece of software and programmed up something and hit the print button on my 3D printer, and out popped a couple of gears, put them back into the gearbox case, took it back the next day to the guy and said, will this do in the meantime? And he looked at it and thought, where did you get that from? I said, I just made it. He says, what? You just made those parts? It's like, yeah, 3D printer. And he's like, Anyway, we replaced the gearbox, started the thing printing, and off it went. No worries, it was the paper feed gear. Printed another 100,000 pages since then. So when people say you can't, or you won't, or you have to throw it away because it's junk or something, I've learned to question that, come up with an alternate plan. So I've been building 3D printers for a while, and I thought, okay, I think I understand how this sort of computer control stuff works. Tied into my own software development side of things, I understand the computers, I understand the mechanics of it now. So I thought, I want a laser cutter. So I ordered, hit the button on a 600 by 900, 130 watt CO2 laser. Beautiful machine, arrived about 3 months later on the slow boat from China. Plugged it in and nothing happened. So I've heard about Chinese quality, but I didn't quite expect this level of quality. You would expect at least when you plug it in and turn the on button that you'd get something out of it. She was tripping the RCD from day one. Got out my trusty spectacles and had a look and kind of worked through the whole shooting match and figured that it was only when I turned the power supply for the laser on that it tripped the RCD, so it kind of got me working along towards the laser power supply. And I found this little gem. Somehow when the power supply had been put together, a component got jammed under the side of the case. The case shorted the two legs of the component out to ground, so anytime there was power, bingo. Pull the component out of the way, put the cover back on. Hey, wow, she now sparks up, live and happy. All good, you'd think. Except now, you turn it on, you fill the thing with coolant because it's designed to run with a refrigerated water jacket. Okay, cool. Except that this thing's leaking from the pressure switch. Luckily, the refrigerated cooler also had a pressure alarm and a wiring for that, so I just bypassed the junk component, fed it through the alert switch on the cooler, and that got up and running. So that was all well and good. We've managed to now get power and water to the machine without it leaking everywhere and without it tripping RCDs. So I start to trace out my first design, and of course that didn't work either. It would go in one direction but not the other. Closer investigation revealed the crimps on the connectors had been crimped through from the bottom, and instead of closing out the crimp, it sort of expanded the crimp, and there were some loose wires. So got out my trusty crimps and redid all the crimps on the machine, and hey presto, press the go button and we have laser. You can get anything done, you can fix anything up, you can make anything happen. These are core tenets that I've learned along the way. A great book that I read once was Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and this book by Robert M. Piercy has probably two takeaway points for me. One is you've got your mind fixed on the destination. Your destination is cruising on down the road on your motorbike or whatever. And all you need to do is change this one thing, oil change or something. So you're sitting there thinking of this cruising down the road, and you've got your wrench on the spanner, and you've just taken the head off a nut. Now you're stuck. The block that's in front of you now stops you from riding down the road because you weren't present to what you were doing now. You've caused yourself a present moment blockage. And that is something that really hits home for me. Think about what you're doing now and what could possibly go wrong, and be prepared for the outcomes. Be prepared for a rounded off bolt, or for a screw thread to strip out, or for a who knows what. And little things Dave taught me started coming back to me. Like, you're about to undo a cover on a brake fluid reservoir on a motorbike. Don't just go straight into it with your hex head. Take a small pin punch that's the size of the head, gentle tap with your machinist hammer, break the threads, steel and aluminium. They'll typically gall up, so you'll have a problem if you just try twisting away at first. Give yourself that little bit of extra help. A tap on the head of the screw, loosen it up. Gold. Other thing he's talking about in his book is him and his mate. And his mate's got a BMW, and it's fully serviced by the workshop and all this sort of stuff. And his handlebars are wobbly. The clamp bolts on the handlebar, even though they're tightened fully up, aren't tight enough to hold his handlebar. And the bloke writing the book basically goes and grabs a beer can and a pair of tin snips and cuts a piece of the side of this can out, pulls the handlebars off, puts this piece of aluminium in, closes it up, and his handlebars don't wobble. And his mate is absolutely furious. He's like, what the hell are you doing? That's not a proper part for this motorbike. You can't use that on here. It's not what the factory would do, take it out. And he's back to riding with his loose handlebars because he's too stubborn to realise that what his mate's come up with is a bush shim. It's what you need to stop the job. It's just to totally fix the problem by addressing what mechanically needs to happen, rather than getting stuck up on labels and types and all this stupid kind of crap that people get into. The part doesn't have to come from there for it to do the job. So to bring us back to some sort of sense of what I see with YouTube, I started off with Thingiverse. I put designs out there. I had a Flickr feed for a while where I would record my projects and take some photos, and there's some pretty cool projects in there, some of the ones I've spoken about. And now I've found that in this community, which is YouTube, people like Keith Fenner and Tom and Abon and Avi and NYCCNC have started to throw some really useful learning experiences for me. And that's part of what, realizing how little I know, is seeing how much you guys are contributing to the passed on knowledge. And I think that's what really gets me about YouTube, is for me, watching somebody do it is how I learn. It's not how everybody learns, I get that, but it is how I learn. And I think it's how I want to teach. So my plan and my goal from here isn't to be the biggest, baddest machinist out there, but it is just to have a way of giving back. What I see with this community is that you are a community of people, and that's important to me. You're not a faceless mass, you're a group of people. And more than your toolbox, I want to be able to be a member of this community. And I'm asking for you to do what you said you will do, which is that for people who nominate, you'll put their name out. And I'm hoping in some of the discussion that I've given so far, there'll be some worthiness visible that you will say, hey, here's a guy we want in our community. Here's a guy who's got the values, the desire, the motivation to not get stuck, who will actually get shit done and who can share about it. So more than a toolbox, I'm hoping I can get that trickle of interest in my channel, and from there be able to become somebody you guys will see as a person, instead of just a name on a comment list or a random in your inbox, because that is what I am missing, is that sense of community, that sense of belonging to a group of like-minded individuals who swings and roundabouts. You're giving, you're receiving, it's all good, So, you've got my box, Keith. You can keep it, or you can send it to me if you think I'm worthy, but please think of me as a potential applicant to the community. Thanks, guys.